But I still feel like we are not at the table when we're talking about menopause. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's probably it's perhaps it's less to do with Davina and it's more to do with the conversation, and we're still being ignored. And that's the thing that really fucks me off, to be honest, putting it bluntly.
Welcome to the Full Stop Podcast, a childless community podcast with Berenice Smith, Sarah Lawrence and me, Michael Hughes. And if this is your first time here, our podcast delves into the many facets that make up the childless identity, as well as what is going on in the wider childless community. And our hope is that with all our special guests, we can help you craft your own narrative and what it means to be part of our community. And we also aim to educate those not in our community who can begin to understand and support those in their lives who may be facing a life without children. Now, this episode, with our dear friend Anastasia MacDonald, we delve into menopause from a childless perspective. Now, so I don't spoil this much needed and enlightening conversation, let's just dive straight in.
Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners? Because we try to ask people to introduce themselves in their own words in case we kind of like get it wrong. But I've known you for a number of years now, haven't I, actually? Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because you did my logo for the little business. And then we met up in Bindi's meditation class too.
Yes, Bindi Shah. Yes. And her magnificent meditation. I was speaking to her on Friday, actually.
So I'm Anastasia. I live in Columbia, Maryland, on the East Coast of the U.S. I am childless by circumstance. I realized I would be childless early in 2014 and grieved some then, although it wasn't really until 2018 that I dove in and sort of got into the grief and started excavating it and looking at it and starting to more deliberately heal. And that's the end of 2017 is when I found Gateway Women. I did the online bee with Jody. It was game-changing, life-changing, wonderful. Yeah. And I'm sort of, I feel like in these last 4+ years, I've sort of been part of the childless community in different ways, keeps evolving, as we all do. And now these days I feel sort of like a member at large, plugging into different aspects and speaking up here and there and staying quiet in other realms.
It's interesting, isn't it, how it changes, how we connect with the community as we sort of go through our own, oh God, don't you hate it when you say journey? But it kind of is, isn't it? So in terms of how you're connecting with the community, how are you connecting at the moment? Because I know you have sort of changed the sort of way that you turn up, haven't you?
Yes, I'm on Lighthouse Women. I'm the host for our local group, host with a semi-official co-host for our local gatherings here. And it does seem like that's in a new phase of growth, perhaps, the local group, which is funny. Energy builds on energy. It's now feeling easier to host that because we're getting new interest. So somewhat in Lighthouse Women on the whole of the platform. And then on Instagram, I've been very deliberate that Facebook is for all realms of life and Instagram is 95% only for childless community. Yeah. And I listen to a few special podcasts and try to be brave and have small conversations that feel doable, and which is not necessarily community building, but practice building my voice in small sort of real life ways.
there a sense of liberation about that, do you think?
Yeah. Even when it's a conversation that's easy, even when it's just slipping in the tiniest thing and it's well received, I'm always very proud of myself. And I always report back to at least one of my online bee friends that I spoke up for me, I spoke up for us. Yeah. And every time makes all the future times easier. For sure.
Amazing, because I can see it in your face. Obviously, we don't share the video, so the listeners won't know that. But having known you for a number of years now, I can see it in your face, and it's just a lovely thing to witness. So yeah, good on you. Please, it's just that little, just a small word here and there, and it does. It's the energy, as you said, it's feeding off the energy of others. And I think those meetups as well are so powerful. We share our stories together, and it creates strength, even if we don't realize that we're saying things and doing things. Just small little words and just dropping things in here. There can be very small little nuggets of change.
And I think there's something, I feel like I've learned this at some point in the online bee, that there's something about really doing those little nuggets with no expectations. You know, you hope you're going to get a thoughtful response, or at least seed falling on good ground kind of response. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes people just say, "What'd you say?" Because they're not expecting the phrase "childless not by choice." But yeah, I figure it's planting seeds and speaking up. Speaking up tiny counts.
Oh, I think it all counts, doesn't it? Even just showing up, really, even as a childless woman, showing up in life is a big deal, isn't it? I think, even if we're not sort of saying, I just happen to be, childless not by choice or childless by circumstance. It's just showing up, isn't it? I think it's kind of, as you rightly say, just the little things means that we actually make space for us. And I think that's really starting to become increasingly important.
I love that expectation as well. No expectations. One of the things I sort of think about is that often the responses that we get says more about the other person than us. And I think keeping that in mind and thinking, well, I've got nothing to lose, because we do have something to lose. We often give pieces of ourselves away when we don't necessarily want to, really want to talk about it. I was reminded actually this morning, there was a conversation on Twitter about with Ali Hall, who does the child free by choice. So it's a slightly different narrative to us, of course. But actually there's quite a lot in common. And she was saying about how we're all entitled to flexi time and to part-time work. You're allowed to ask. You don't have to just have children to do that. You can go off and do a side hustle. You can do something else. And I happened to mention in a conversation that Sarah, you and I had done that over the past. And I said, it just reminds me of a conversation I had with somebody who said to me, well, how are your children? And I said and again, it's giving away part of yourself, but I said, sadly, I don't have any children. It's not why I'm part-time. And she said to me, yes, you do. I said, what the hell are you on? I think I would probably know if I had children. But I think it was so ingrained in her somehow, this weird thing, because she was a parent and she was part-time, that actually that was the only way you could be part-time. And again, it's a conversation where it shows, yes, you can give something of yourself, or you can say, no, I'm not part-time for that reason. And I thought, no, that says everything I need to know about you. And I actually feel quite sad for you. Really, I do, because you're not going to get far in life with that kind of attitude. The bias was just incredible. Yeah. It was just bizarre.
As much as I'm increasingly aware that when each of us speaks up, even in those small ways, we're speaking up for ourselves. But increasingly, I'm aware that I am speaking up for all of us, that it's going to be good for the whole in ways that I may never know. That's one of the podcasts I listen to is New Legacy Institute, and she is just inspiring me over and over and over that it's, yes, there's these personal healings and personal evolutions that we're each making our way through. And it does seem like there's this socio-political wave of us that's coming.
Mm.
And that makes me brave too.
And you think 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago?
Hey, nothing.
No, really. And actually what Michael's doing with building up the male voice as well is incredibly important too. I had some really exciting conversations in the last couple of weeks about that. And there's a couple of really cool things going on around that too. And they all actually come off an awful lot of the work that you're doing, Michael, in giving people voices and giving men voices. It was one of those things where the weird thing about, ranting on about International Women's Day, but actually one of the things that's never covered on International Men's Day is childless men, and that needs to change too.
Yeah, that sense of there's this growing political, social voice that we're gathering. I really feel the same. I look back to when I found out I couldn't have children. It was roughly the same time as you, Anastasia, and it's kind of, there was nothing. I remember doing this desperate Google search, and there was nothing. But I reckon, you Google now. Clearly, we've got a bit of a terminology thing going on as well. We know who we are. We have a, dare I say it, a label, but we now know we have an identity, don't we? We have this identity, and we know who we are. Anastasia, sorry. But it's really, I think you're right, it's this growing voice, and I think we are starting to turn up in more and more varied conversations. We're talking about menopause today, and I said earlier before we start recording, I kind of feel like we haven't really got a place at the table yet, but it is a yet, isn't it?
What do you mean when you say that? What makes you say we don't have a place at that table?
Well, I see a lot of conversations going on, and it kind of feels as though there's lots of conversations in terms of women that have had children, and so it's part of that evolution of a woman going from being able to have children to not. But for those of us that have not been able to have children, we're not part. Doesn't strike me that part of the narrative yet, because I feel personally I've had a very different experience of my menopause as opposed to friends who have had children. It feels, I look at the way that they're reacting to their menopause, and it's kind of almost like a sudden, oh my God, I can't have children. Whereas I've known for a while I've not been able to have children. And so there is this difference, and there isn't really much acknowledgement that my experience is different to theirs.
That came up actually, I think, on the Instagram as well. One of the comments that we had, and I'm just going to go and find it, if you bear with me for a moment, because I should have had this all to hand before we started. And also where my clicks are being heard probably as well. Where are we? Okay, gosh, quite a few comments. So one of them that we had was from somebody who said that they feel angry sometimes that my body let me down in not being able to have a child, and now it's going through the menopause, hitting me with all these shitty symptoms that are debilitating at times. But I get so upset when people who've had kids say, I'm glad to be going through this now because I've hardly noticed any change. And I think Jodie Day, I'm sure it's Jodie, has said that it's the menopause, not the mother pause.
Mm. Yeah.
And it feels like one of those, again, like International Women's Day, it feels like it's been something that's been taken over by the majority. And in a way, that happens. That's society at large on lots of different themes. But universally, it affects women at different times of their lives, but it affects all women. Medically, I believe that to be the case. Again, I'm not kind of saying that, I know all the answers to those things, but yes, it feels like that the shift needs to come. And one of the interesting things I've noticed is that there is this talk now I've found over here. I don't know if you've seen it, Sarah, but companies talking a little bit more on LinkedIn, for example, about menstrual leave, about how periods are affecting the workplace. And I don't know if that's global, but it appears to be a tentative thing. It's not. You're shaking it. Okay, yeah, and that's a real kind of like. It's odd that it's happening in this country, but I suppose maybe perhaps there is a push with that coming from the pandemic. I think a lot of women have been away from the workplace. I can speak for myself personally in that actually since IVF and that failure of that, my period's worse. Absolutely worse. I'm more in touch with my hormones. And I think during lockdowns, I became increasingly more in touch with my hormones. And I was aware that at least, and I hadn't thought about it, because I used to share a flat with somebody and I love her to bits. But for 4 days of every month, she would not talk to me. And I had no idea why. I thought I'd done something wrong because I was sailing through. Here's some bias for you, my own bias. I sailed through them all. I was fine. I was right. It was like an inconvenience. I take some, painkillers and carry on. I didn't have that hormonal roller coaster until after I've been through through IVF. And then I realized, possibly because I think the term that's used is medical menopause. Again, someone might want to correct me on that, but that's the term I heard used, is because the way that the drugs work, you go into a false menopausal state. And since that point, I've been terrified of the menopause, because if it's like that, then God knows. But again, it's medicine. Medical isn't necessarily the same as natural. But yeah, I'm kind of aware that this conversation is now happening around menstrual leave and women saying, actually, I want to work from home. I don't want to come in because actually I cannot manage. I've realized that me standing around doing a shift or whatever I'm doing when I am going through this is painful. And that maybe is off the back of the conversations that we're having more awareness about the menopause, which I'm kind of hopeful, slightly hopeful that maybe encourages perhaps childlessness as a conversation too. Maybe there's a thin liminal space where we can get in and say, hi, us too. Because an awful lot of our community have already been through the menopause early on, been there much, much earlier than they should have done had we have all fitted into what society believes is a normal woman. And what we're probably finding out now is that actually we're not. We're all much more than that, aren't we? There are way more seats at the table. Sorry, I rattled on. I was on a mini rant there. Stop now. But it is this kind of thing, isn't it, where you have this sort of thing that happens to all women, and yet somehow, how does it happen that it all starts to be divided into little bits, and my piece of the pie is bigger than your piece of the pie? Actually, if we all just sit together and have a conversation about it, we'd all realize that actually it happens to all of us. Anyway, I'm going to stop ranting now. I get really cross about that.
Yeah, I don't feel like my experience is different from what you and Sarah are describing. I don't take in a lot of mainstream media. And the places, the resources I've gone to for menopause information, I'm realizing are actually sort of parenthood status neutral or deliberately inclusive. And I haven't felt that mother, not mother distinction among my friends. Mostly everyone seems glad simply to have an empathetic person who's going through some version of it. I don't know, it that sort of splitting into groups version of it might be in the mainstream magazines. But honestly, I feel like I haven't encountered it. It hasn't smacked me in the face like that.
That's a really positive thing, actually, because perhaps it's pockets where perhaps small pockets, then maybe not larger pockets, where perhaps there needs to be just a small conversation to say this. And actually, there are examples out there where it is more inclusive than perhaps some of the areas that we've encountered, which is a good thing. I think that's positive. It doesn't feel perhaps like the enormous, perhaps bias that perhaps maybe the areas that we've encountered and some of our listeners have encountered feel. And it'd be interesting to see what the response is to that, I think, when we put the episode out, as to whether there is perhaps bias in different countries, different industries even. I mean, I'm thinking from the workplace as much as anything, as some of the conversations with Katie missed, and about that type of, whether you're, what it's like in this country working with childless, infertility, miscarriage, and all those areas, and some of the workshops that she's done, and the one that we carried out together way back in November, and whether there are just pockets, certain industries even, that have more bias perhaps than others as well. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what listeners' responses are. If anyone has any thoughts on that, then please let us know in the comments on the website or online as well, or drop us an email. I'd be really curious to see how that is. But it feels like there's something a bit more hopeful, which is a good thing, isn't it? Michael, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm obviously very aware that I'm a bit of a fish out of water on this episode. So I'm taking it as a education for me. So on behalf of all those curious men that want to understand this, I want to take us back a little bit. And I'm going to say this wrong. Anastasia? Oh, thank you. Because I've got in trouble by a couple of other people for saying their names wrong. But anyway.
You also have to say Berenice quite a lot too. So yeah, it's fine.
So when you said you're finding, I'll use my words, you're finding the vocabulary to use to explain how our situation, the way that you're living through childlessness. I really resonate with that, because one of the things I found through all the things that I do is that I'm doing the same. I never realised it, but I'm actually doing the same. So with that in mind, I have a point. So I'm going to take that with this episode. As I said, it's an education. So I'm going to take you back basically, and I'd really love to hear either your experiences, if you wish to share your experiences or your thoughts, or what does menopause mean for you? Obviously, I've had this conversation with Vicky, but I need more, and I'm sure there's other curious people out there would want to understand this more. So yeah, sorry to drag you back a bit, but yeah, I'd really love to hear what you three lovely ladies have to say about that.
Well, I'll go first if you like. I mean, so for me, I've had a taste of really extreme menopause after my hysterectomy, because your ovaries basically go to sleep, they go into shock, and then they have to. It's basically luck of the draw whether they decide to switch back on or not. So my experience after my hysterectomy was waking up absolutely smothered in sweat, so much so that I thought I'd wet myself. I thought I'd lost control of my bladder, and the roller coaster of the emotions. So I remember, I mean, I was quite emotional anyway because my hysterectomy brought up all of my childlessness again, and there was a nurse there, and I don't usually use names, but she was the biggest bitch I've ever come across, who's in a caring role, and I had to have injections in my stomach for blood clots because obviously you can't move. And she came in one night, and it was about the third night, and my stomach was very swollen. I was sweating. I was all over the place. I was getting triggered all over the place. And she came in and jabbed me with this needle, and I got really upset. And she basically walked out as though I shouldn't have been upset. And I thought, fucking hell, pardon my language, but if this is what it's going to be like, I really don't want anything to do with it. And my experience so far of the menopause is it's a lot more gentle than that. It's like a slow switch rather than like that. But what I have found is that actually you kind of have to accept that your body's just going to do some weird and wonderful things. I can be talking mid-sentence, I can suddenly forget what the hell I was talking about, or why I walked into a room, or all of those things. I sat there yesterday. It's going to sound like random. I sat and watched The Lost Boys. Haven't watched it for years. Love it. And I was searching for it, and I couldn't remember the film that I was searching for. That's kind of, it just does it. And you just have to kind of, I think for me, it's a growing acceptance of not being the woman that I was before. But it's also the growing realization that actually my childlessness is mixed up in that. And I no longer want to have a biological child from this body, but I still mourn the loss of the opportunity. And I think that's kind of, putting it in a more articulate way, that's kind of, for me, the difference between those that have had children and those that haven't. It's that the grief is different, if that makes sense. But for me, my body is changing, and I've got to admit, I don't like it. I'm really struggling with it. I don't know how you two feel.
I think I, without hating on my body, as I sort of got into my late 40s, having my period was such an annoyance and sort of lowercase o offense, that part of my body hadn't done what it was meant to do. So why did I have to keep having this monthly not fun? And I sort of figured, just be done with it. So there was a certain, not exactly looking forward to it, but looking forward to menopause, and sort of finishing up that chapter. And I still wonder if there will be another big wave of grief, because there hasn't been I think because I have known for so long that the fertility window was closed, and because it's now been these 4+ years that I've really been chewing on all the issues and working to heal the grief, the idea of my own fertility is so historical now, so far in the past, that this ending hasn't felt like an end of that. It has sort of felt more like a thing of its own, a next phase, a next chapter, all these weird new things. And it's not been easy. Not even so much in the childless related things, but it got me with some real psycho-emotional, weird, not fun stuff. Last summer felt like one long seasonal affective disorder episode, which does not happen in the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And as you said, in part, I realized you have to roll with it and find humor in it and find people that you can make jokes about night sweats with. And eventually I did talk to my doctor, and I now am on this marvelous estrogen by patch, which is bringing me back to myself. And in the mix of all that, I think I had hope. I had this thread of hope throughout, because I know women personally. I know women in the childless community and other communities, in things I've read, who are through to the other side and say, it's really fabulous over here. It's imperfect. It can be rough getting here, but get here. It's not a return to who you were, but it's more than just an ease of all those maddening symptoms. There's some new version of you that's over here. And, I feel like I've been getting glimmers of her for a while. And, I have long said, since my online B year, I have said that I can imagine that older, sassy, childless crone that I'm aiming for. And I could not imagine the smack in the middle midlife childless woman. I didn't know what she looked like. I didn't quite know who she was. And so there's sweetness, but there's even excitement about getting closer to that one that I can envision.
Yeah, actually brought tears to my eyes there, actually. That can't imagine the childless woman in between. Yeah, I resonate with that, Anastasia. I feel that somewhere too. My feelings about the menopause are actually that since the podcast began, and I think we knew that at some point we would have to talk about the menopause, was fear. For me, absolute fear. And still is, to a point, although I'm much reassured by the conversations that I have had, and slowly sort of tentatively looking. And I bought a book about 2 years ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, and it's The Men's Guide to the Menopause. And I handed it to my other half. And I hope this doesn't feel exclusionary to anyone who is not partnered. But it's part of my story, because it sort of shows the level of denial that I have. It was like, there you go, you read it and then you tell me the highlights. Because I don't want to know. And then, I can sort of let myself off with bad behaviour, so it's menopause. At least he would know, because I didn't really feel like I wanted to engage with it. My experiences of it are that as I've said already, about medically induced menopause. So during IVF, I had different types of drug treatment. And the first few cycles where they had to do egg collection, I reacted very badly to the medication. I had ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. I was an emotional wreck. I remember being in Cornwall once, and there is a pub in Cornwall that I will never ever return to, because I just sat there for the entire duration in bits and absolute tears, because they came in, some people came in and they were doing singing. If you've seen Fisherman's Friends, you know what I'm talking about. And they're probably taxi drivers, whatever, I don't know. Anyway, I could not control any emotion whatsoever, and I just cried and I cried and I cried all the way through the whole thing. And I remember sleeping in the spare room of the house that we were in, because I felt so ill, so hot, so miserable, everything. And it's all induced by medication, and that's a very different experience. So that gave me a fear of this. And since I've come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to be a mother, and again, the grieving process and that wave of grief, again, I can identify with what you're talking about there. It's kind of, am I expecting something else to happen? Because I've grieved the fact I'm not going to be a mother. I know that. And when I look at the world around us and the planet, I think, maybe I'd have twice as many more worries as I do now, but it doesn't mean I don't mourn that loss. And the opportunity, as you said, Sarah, is the opportunity to be a mother. But I sometimes think, I've got the state of things. But I think there is going to be a mourning period for who I've become now, not who I was before. My childless and my trying to be a mother is long past. Even though occasionally I've had things where I've thought, oh, maybe and I think, oh, hang on, no, we've done that bit. It's occasionally just pops up. Or maybe there's a way. Now, hang on, stop it. Don't try and fix yourself, live with and breathe through that and come to terms with it. And Bindi, we mentioned Bindi briefly before, but Bindi Shah's meditation has been a huge part of that healing process for me, and knowing Bindi too, and the women within that group. It's absolutely incredible to share those stories. But I think there's more grief to come. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to do as prep work, as Michael and Sarah will tell you. I do prep work. I kind of like, here's the thing coming over the hill, and I'm going to be prepared for it. And you can't. And that, I think, is the worrisome thing. I'm lifting kettlebells, like, I just love my kettlebells. It's like some kind of weird kind of thing where I hate them but love them. I seem to be regressing to sort of going back to my sort of goth roots to my teenager. I feel like I'm going through some kind of like identity thing at the moment. And again, with my diet and things like that, I posted on Instagram last night about, being vegan isn't boring. I'm not vegan, but I'm predominantly plant-based now, and trying probably actually, now I think about it, I'm trying to prepare for something I cannot really prepare for, because I have no idea how it's going to hit me. I don't know if it will be like that time in Cornwall, and I don't know whether it's going to be something more gentle. And I suspect, having spoken to Sarah about this before, and in this conversation, I think it is going to be more gentle. It's a case of just having to accept it. But I'm quite prepared for grief. And I find it difficult to talk about. Really do. I can feel it in my voice, and I can feel how I'm reacting to it. I feel like, and I think adding on the childlessness makes it a very different experience, because there is that extra level, I think, perhaps for some of our listeners, and I can identify with that too, that there is still a mourning period for the fact that actually that is it. And again, that's come up on our feedback too, is that actually you have this thing of that's perhaps not recognized by others is, well, actually, no, it is. I think for women who've had children, I don't want to bring them into the conversation too much, because that's not what it's about, and there's enough conversation about that. But there is that, okay, that's that. It's that finality, that is over. It's hard. I'm all over the place with it. Some days I'm looking forward to the fact that I don't have to go through this monthly reminder. But at the same time, I think, oh, thank God, right? I have a monthly reminder. Right? It's fine. It's great. I haven't yet got to perimenopause, which is kind of also weird at my age, because actually I was told 10 years ago, oh, you know, it's all scrambled now, that's it, you know, you're gonna, you know, the menopause is going to hit you very soon by the clinic, by the IVF clinic, and actually it hasn't. And then I can't to think, well, would I have had another opportunity? Would there have been another cycle in there I could have had then? So yeah, it's all a bit of a fuck up in my head, and I'm sure that's true of many. And I hope that anything I've mentioned hasn't been too triggering for people, but that's my kind of honest account of where I am right now, and it's hard, really difficult.
I love that. I mean, you've made me feel a little bit normal, because I find, I don't know about you, tell me if
I made you feel normal.
But
how the hell did I do that?
that bit, Anastasia, where you sort of said there's this other woman that is beyond this, let's call it what it is, shit show, and I'm looking forward to being her. And I go through phases of, I think I see her as well, but then I also got a very teenage side. So, you know, some days I'll be like, no, fuck you all. I don't want to abide by your rules. I'm going to wear something that's really age inappropriate. And, you know, just, it's almost like there's this internal battle going on in terms of, I'm going to be this woman. I'm now wrestling with the fact that I've got to leave behind this younger version of me. And there's all sorts of shit comes up. You know, some days I'm wearing clothes that I just think, well, that's a bit odd. Why do I fancy wearing I don't know, you know, a very tight, I've got this really tight band t-shirt that I like to wear on a slim day, because this is the other thing as well. This is the thing that really fucks me off, is sometimes my body will be the size that I think it should be. And then other days it'll just go, oh, by the way, it's just going to be 2 sizes bigger today, just for shits and giggles. And you're like, there's no accounting for it. You know, the belly does what the belly does. But it's that's the bit I think I'm really struggling with, is the kind of who I turn up on the day, whether I'm in a good mood, a bad mood, a hormonal mood, because I still get them, or whether I'm going to be the size I think I should be, or the size that my belly thinks I should be on any given day. And the effects as well, you know, when people do talk about menopause, they sort of say, oh, well, you know, you might have, you know, your periods might turn up differently, or you might have a bit of a bad mood. But nobody tells you that your stomach, you know, IBS, I don't know if either of you get that. I get really bad IBS symptoms for no apparent reason. And there's no accounting for it. I can eat the same thing every day, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, hello, IBS. So it's that sort of thing, I think, that really winds me up. You just don't know whether you're coming or going. Is that just me?
No, it's real. It's real.
Thank you.
I had the insight recently that I've been living from the story that I still have this longing to hermit, because sort of a post-pandemic thing, not quite ready to go out in the world. And recently, sort of thanks to one of the menopause podcasts I listened to, I had the insight that, well, that might be a little bit pandemic ripple effect, but maybe it's largely just this menopause longing to be quiet and to avoid, and but that also, like you're saying, it comes and goes. There are days when I'm ready and happy to be out in the world, and other days where I want to wear the clothing that makes me happy that day, which maybe I wouldn't wear out in the world, and I just want to be home. And that was a new idea really in the last week. And I'm trying to give it space to say, yeah, this is a time of shit show and joy and excitement, and what the heck is going on? And to just find ways to slow it all down, or, you know, to slow down what I can slow down in terms of, you know, what's on the calendar, what's expected of me, to one of the podcasts I love for menopause stuff is the Menstruality podcast, which is put out by Red School. And so two women who are the primary sort of teachers on there about menopause has written a book recently, which I haven't read yet. But in one episode, they talked about the word snudge, which they said is a real word, but it's an old word and it's fallen out of use, but we should definitely bring it back. It means to get by doing the very least possible. And they just say, this is how to survive your menopause transition. And it's about self-care too, right? It's about learning our own truest, deepest self-care. And so I thought that whole concept of snudge is just brilliant because, right, whatever your experience is, where you're doing this thing that feels like wise woman, teenager flipping, or whether grief is smashing you down that day, that week, how can we each find ways to just snudge our way out of life a little bit, or through life a little bit?
I love snudge. What brilliant.
Yeah. Snudge.
It reminds me of the thing on Twitter that occasionally you see and on Instagram where calling cards from like past eras. I think that's right. It's Nancy Mitford who had one that just says, "No, I decline to see you." Resurrect calling cards. Gently said, and the right to say no. I think that's come, that has been kind of one of those things that I think has come from the pandemic, is that actually, our levels of tolerance, I think, have changed. I tend to go on the line of, if it's not useful or beautiful, badly paraphrasing William Morris. But yeah, if it's not useful or beautiful, then why? I think I kind of tend to fool my life around that. But snudge is great. Yeah, we can bring that back. Yeah. And thank you for the recommendation as well. That was one of the things that came up on Instagram, is from one of our followers just saying, are there support groups available for childless and menopause? I've searched and could only find support groups for those going through IVF, which is not an option for me, and that they entered the menopause at age 35, and so many questions around options to help with brain fog, low libido, etc. I'm on HRT now, but still confused as to what that might mean for my future health, increased risk of breast cancer, osteoporosis, dementia, depression.
I've got to be
honest, can't answer that really, but actually if people do have any support groups around childless and menopause, I haven't found any. I have to specifically for childless and menopause. I would think that there are probably some good conversations to be had in groups like Lighthouse Women. And of course there are within your network as well, Sarah, I think counsellors and coaches who probably around that. And Sarah Roberts has also put in, so the Empty Cradle has replied to say, living it now, intense, incredibly powerful experience, harnessing it to go deeper, not easy, but worth it with you if it's hard. I think trying, if you can, you feel comfortable having a conversation with people within our community, if you don't want to talk about it at large with others, is probably a good way to start to get some form of support in place. I think with lots of these things, we have to create it ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's tough to do. As we know, all of us sitting here today, it's tough to start a conversation. It's tough to start something that's a support network, but I think that's where to go with that. Would be my advice on it. And hopefully this episode might lead to something too. Perhaps there's something we can do and support people within our community. If somebody's willing to say, okay, I can start something up, then we'll give you all the help we can from our network to make that happen for you too, as I'm sure others will too. One thing that I have learnt about our community is that we are very loyal and supportive of each other's endeavours.
Definitely. It would be good to start something. I think there's so much healing. Like today's conversation has been a bit like, is this right? Is everybody else experienced this? It's, you just don't know what is within the realms of, I hate the word, but what's in the realms of what is normal, what's supposed to be happening or how people are experiencing it. We don't really talk about it. And it would be good to start a conversation so that we can kind of normalize it a little bit for our experience, not just across womanhood. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That just kind of popped into my head then. Actually, one person who does talk a lot about this in terms of childlessness is Stella Duffy.
Stella Duffy, I couldn't remember her name.
So yeah, look up Stella. She's follows the podcast and of course was on a previous episode too. And there's an awful lot of conversations that she's having around that too. And I think drawing on perhaps some of the people who are in that space. Jodie, of course, has her projects as well around crone and around aging. Again, another area perhaps to look at too. I think if you think about, say, 10 years ago and the people that we knew then who were starting to do things, and of course we're all aging. So I think as we all age from when we first began, we were like, oh my God, this childlessness is upon us. We're all aging and starting to talk a little more about it. And from that, I think there would be more coming. It's a case of just sort of us all getting to the point where we've got to the point where we've had the menopause to go through and say, it's like this. As you said, Anastasia, it's people saying to you, it's okay over this side, and it's getting to that side and finding those people in that community too, which is a really hopeful thing to hear from you. Thank you. I feel so much more hopeful having listened to you. Thank you.
Michael, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be absolutely silent in this episode, to be quite honest. But so listening to the three of you, I just want to. I was probably just. It's just something, an observation I have. I've got two things I want to say. The first one is that this observation where I've sort of come to in my own experience, rather than say journey, in my own experience, it's around transitions. So I'm listening to you three ladies, and part of this is obviously a transition from oneself to another. And I sometimes think that for myself, I got to 50 and I went, well, fuck, how did that happen? What happened there? It's like, wow, bang, 50. And it was like for the first time I had to do a transition. Now, of course, I'm not saying that it's actually. I'm just realising that other members of our community might get upset with the word transition, but there's the best I can do. And so I sort of had this thought that because my path wasn't the same as most men, I've never had to have that transition. So let's say I was a teenager, then I met someone, I became a partner. That's where it ended. Whereas everyone else has a number of transitions through their life. And so are they more resilient to transition? I don't know. It's just what's the thought in my head. And for us, is it, bam, here it is, transition time. And so, whoa, what have I got to do? Hang on. And of course, depending on how you're made up, the sky could be falling in and others handle it really well. But we haven't built up that resilience that others have. Yeah, don't know where I'm going with that, but it's just a thought. The second thing is that what is it that you would like me to know about this? Is it so? Could you, think of me as just other men. What would you want other men to know or understand? So, give me something to take away.
I would like to just say notice.
Okay.
Because actually, when you think about it, for me, one of the fears I have is that I feel like right now I'm in the best shape I've been for years and years and years. Mentally, physically, I'm doing okay. And when you get to that point, society, this is not just, well, men society, everybody really, is that actually, when you get to the point where you've had menopause and you start to get the grey hairs and you start to age and you become just, for me, it's being an invisible person. I become invisible at that point to men's society, when actually I have a lot to offer, and that ageism comes in. I'm already grieving the fact that actually I can't be a mother, which is a loss of fertility, which is the thing that society and men go, oh, mother kind of thing. And that sort of, that whole kind of sexuality of being a mother. Then you go through the bit where you're kind of like, oh yeah, you're old. And and actually for me, it's like, I always envisage myself as having this house where people will come in and go, and I'd be kind of some kind of like font of wisdom. And maybe the podcast is a bit like that, but it's not really. It's the physicality of having a role in society, of being some kind of matriarch of some description, like my grandmother was, and my grandmother was, and I am not, because then you're not noticed in that way. So it's the fact that acknowledging that actually I think that women who are older have so much still to give, so much life experience, so much mentoring. Just universally, we have a lot to offer beyond, I think, perhaps what media society think we have lost somewhere along the line. Okay, you're no longer fertile. Well, I haven't been that for ages, so but it's again, it's that thing. I think that's what I kind of want to say. There was something else in my head about what you said before, but I'm going to have to come. Oh, resilience. I'll come back to that. I have a thought of it about resilience, but I'm not sure that I've shaped it. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael, I would say that it's okay to talk about menopause or to ask about it. If I'm your friend or maybe even your colleague, I think maybe you wait for me to make some comment about it, some little share. But it's okay and even welcome for you to acknowledge it and ask into my experience of it a little bit. As I think Gen X are the ones that are going to talk about it, right? We're finding our voice around it in a way that the generation before us didn't. And the men of Gen X are Gen X also. So please be with us, please. Right. It's funny. You are fish out of water. You're one out of three here. You're the one who's not living in a body doing this. But it's still your experience somehow, right? It's indirectly your cohort is going through this. So let's make it a team effort to make it speakable and talk aboutable. So I guess your question makes me say I would not only invite you to join in the conversation about menopause, but I would ask you to join us. Whatever that, and I think that mostly is curiosity, overt curiosity.
Yep. Yeah, that's I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this, but I agree. What you said really resonates with me. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. And next time I'm travelling down south, down the 95, we might have that conversation one day. Because I did still, as the other girls will probably know, once you said where you lived, I was straight onto the map going, I know where that is. I've been past there in about 2005. Okay.
Stop by anytime.
Sarah.
I think it's difficult. What I notice is that my friends and obviously my partner, it can be a bit difficult because, as I say, one day I can turn up as a teenager and another day I can be, I can be feeling pretty shit and not wanting to really engage. But I think what I've found as I go through this is actually I've become a lot of a stronger woman. My opinions and my voice have become more, and I don't know, and I can only speak for the men that are in my, in my orbit. I've had friends that I've been friends with for many, many years, and I have changed. And my experience is that men can find women with an opinion and with a voice quite scary and a bit intimidating and not sure what to do with it. I'm still the same person. I just don't try and hide it as much as I used to. I used to go very quiet, if I didn't agree with something or I had something to say, I would tend to, I won't say it because I don't want to offend. But now, as I've got older, I speak my truth. And I think my experience has been that men don't quite know what to do with us women when we find our voices, which we tend to do when we go through this. I think, the number of fucks we have left to give kind of diminishes very quickly. And I think for guys that can be a bit difficult. But what I would say is I'm still a woman. I'm still the same person that my friends have known for years, but I will speak my truth. And I guess I would like them to feel confident around me that they can actually go, hang on a minute, Sarah, actually, I don't agree with you. And, push back. And I kind of missed that when I was younger. There was a bit more fun and people there was a bit more backwards and forwards. And I wonder sometimes if men kind of want to back off women because they don't know how to deal with us when we go through this. And I'd like to say, guys, just be you. We're not expecting you to be pushovers. We don't want that. I personally don't want that. I want my friends, male friends in particular, to have an opinion, whether that's about menopause, whether that's about politics, whatever. But I would love for blokes to be able to feel that they can be strong around a strong woman.
Yeah. I think it's that curiosity, isn't it, as well? I think we have to sort of stop doing, I think, the them and us thing. I mean, them and us in all ways, but I think men, women, different genders, we have to somehow pull ourselves together and go, these are the things that bind us, because there is an effect, whether it's just being in a workplace and a colleague's going through it and they're having a rough day, or they can't come in. That has an effect on the guys that work in the office too. There is an effect. It isn't something you can just park away and put in a cupboard and go, oh, so-and-so, they're having a bad day today. That's not fair. That's what we did before, but we don't do it now. And the past got us really nowhere. I think it got us into a bit of a kind of a mess with these things. It just wasn't talked about, and it has to be discussed because it's the waves of it reach far.
Yeah.
The root of that question actually comes from a meeting I had at my employment. I think it was last year, the year before. I'm going to obviously go the long way around this, but it was a think tank around how we retain females. So we don't have a problem with employing. We have quite an inclusive environment compared to some industries in Australia. And so we don't have a problem attracting females into our workforce, but we have a problem retaining them. Mm. And so we're trying to, flesh out this why. And one of the younger people in the room told a story that she was rung up by a woman who was driving concrete agitators. So she was in quite a male-orientated sort of environment. And it was that time of the month, and it was tough. It was hard for her. And the best her supervisor could do would go, look, she's on her rags, bloody hell. You're not going home. Get to work, keep going to what you're doing. And obviously absolutely unacceptable behaviour, and it was horrible to hear, but we had to hear it. Mm-hmm. But so that's where the root of my question comes from, is that I would like to be, it's not about me, but I'd like to be someone that is curious and can gather information and understand. So yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate your answers.
I think childless men have an awful lot more a lot more awareness. I think you do. I think because of, whether that's by circumstance, whether you're partnered or not, I think just the conversations that I've had with childless men over the years I've known you and before, there is more empathy there. I think that there is a feeling in my mind that actually that together we have more power regardless, and more empathy, because I think when I think about the conversations you and I've had, and you will turn around and go, actually no, that's not right, and we will talk about things and discuss them. I think that for me is it makes me feel that if I was in any situation where I felt that there was an issue over something as intimate really as the menopause, because it is a very personal thing. We might all go through it, but it affects people in different ways. But actually, if I knew that there was a man out there who would advocate and say, look, actually, hang on a minute, you can't say those words to somebody, even if I didn't want to say them, that someone would turn around and go, no, hang on. Advocacy matters, I think, as well. That curiosity leads to advocacy, which leads to a bigger voice, which means that actually it becomes a thing that everybody talks about. I mean, that's kind of, that wonderful kind of universe that I have in my head, where we all just, childless becomes more, not less, and we talk about it more. But I think advocacy is a huge part of that, along with that curiosity. So the question is really welcome, because I think it can shape perhaps how people move forward.
Well, I think it's what Anastasia said, isn't it? Gen X, we are the talkers. We are the ones that are kind of the pioneers, really. That, bless them, boomers, they didn't talk about this stuff because their parents didn't talk about their stuff. That's just not how it went. Gen X are kind of like, well, no, we're going to talk about it. But it does, as Berenice says, guys have got to be involved in this. It can't just be the women that are talking about it. Guys have got to, bless them, they've got to be able to roll with the punches, haven't they? Because you don't know how we're going to rock up. It could be any given day. We can chop and change our moods because we're going through it. So, it's a learning curve for you guys as well. And I appreciated that question, because I think you're right. I think childless men actually are probably more emotionally intelligent because of the shit that they've had to go through. Some men won't be, but I do think my experience has been, even actually of child free, I've got a lot of friends who are child free, the guys are more emotionally intelligent, they're more attuned to this sort of stuff, because I think the gender roles, and I don't like it, but I think the gender roles play out when you're a parent. They're more inclined to than if you're not. So no, thank you for asking it. It means a lot.
Thanks for trusting me with those answers. I really appreciate it.
I genuinely thought you were going to be very silent too, actually.
Yeah, I did. I was worrying about, oh gosh, Michael's going to feel me excluded. Actually, there's an awful lot of questions to ask. I know my husband read this book, and I'll put it in the show notes. It's not specifically about childlessness. It is menopause at large. So there is stuff in it. I think there could be, a bit pronatal, but he just put it down and went, oh my holy God. It was like, okay, thanks. But he just admitted, what he said was, it was just like, God, what women go through. I can remember, obviously this was there for all the infertility stuff, but there was a moment during the start of lockdowns when I was having a really tough day, and I think I'd probably sort of generally hidden it, or I just got on with things. I would go and I'd carry on with things, but because it was lockdown, because I could go and get the big hot water bottle out and neck down the painkillers and just sit here feeling like this is period rather than menopause, but it was just sat there visibly, clearly not myself. And he said, you've been going through all of that since you were when? And I said, I think 14, 15 years old, I think, something like, I forget when. So, wow. He said, that's really shit, isn't it? And I said, yeah, it's really shit. And then he went out and got me lots of chocolate. He understood the power of chocolate at that point. But I think that I think life has changed, generations have changed, and I think that with childlessness and with infertility, we're more inclined to talk about the rubbish, and we're more inclined to share the really, really grim stuff. But actually, I think perhaps maybe others don't, generations, other parts of society don't. And that makes us a bit more powerful because we're prepared to talk about the nitty-gritty stuff, Sarah, you talked very openly today about your hysterectomy and how that impacted you, and that matters that we hear that too. So thank you also for that. I think this has been such a powerful learning podcast. I've learned so much, if nothing else, that we're stronger together.
Yeah, and thank you, Anastasia. I mean, goodness me, thrown in at deep end with a topic like this.
I know, at 5 a.m. I mean, thank you.
I must have been like white knuckling it. Oh my God. Really going to talk about this? But yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
I want to add, just because Berenice, mentioned a book. The best book I've come across so far is a fairly new one called What Fresh Hell Is This? By Heather Corina. And I feel like she does occasionally even sort of reference, if you're sharing this book with the men in your life, which is just one more way that it's wonderfully inclusive. That's why one of the reasons why I think of it as the best one I found, that she is so wonderfully careful to, always say if about parenthood. She's very inclusive of non-parents, of just any minority you can think of. She's very inclusive in her language, wickedly funny, a little salty in her language, and as far as I can tell, very current in her science. So that's and
thank you.
Help my library system to buy multiple copies of it. That's another stealth thing I do for the childless community. I get my library to buy the books.
Brilliant. That is fantastic.
Actually, that's a fantastic idea, isn't it?
Yeah. I set it up in a workplace, actually. This is something to think about, is that there is the Gender Balance Network that I'm part of. They have a library area, and I've made sure that there are all the books that we know that have been recommended, and quite a few from the NOMO book club as well. They're going on the shelf. I will add that one to it as well, because I think book recommendations are really good. People can read as they need to, dip in, dip out. And to know you've read it as well makes it much safer, I think, too, and becomes further endorsed for our listeners as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think this is invaluable. We need these resources, don't we? I mean, yeah. The one I read was the natural. Sorry, that's why I was turning around. Forgive me. You probably thought I was ignoring you. I wasn't. I was looking at my bookshelf, the natural menopause plan, because I'm very practical, and I can't take HRT because of my endo, and I was told not to because it could trigger it off again. So I look at natural alternatives. Some of them work, some of them don't. But actually, that was where I started. So I take quite a few supplements and do a lot of exercise, trying to manage it that way, because not all of us can take HRT.
Right.
Yeah.
Now that you say exercise, the other resource that is, so my three are the Menstruality podcast, What Fresh Hell Is This, and a podcast / platform called Hit Play Not Pause, which is intended for women who are sort of endurance athletes, super sporty gals, which is not me. But they do try to welcome anyone who's looking to do some exercise and movement. And she also has very current science mixed in. and has a real mindset of, this is a very subjective experience. Here's all the information that might help you. You and maybe your doctor need to figure out what's the best course for you. And, oh, by the way, eating well and exercising as much as you can only help you. So she is a wonderful source of information too.
It definitely feels like this is the start of something, doesn't it? We need some sort of thing, some sort of resource in this community, don't we, to help us out with this? Yeah.
Yeah. And that one, I will say, in terms of inclusivity, so the she is Celine Yeager is her name. And I wouldn't say there's the same kind of overt inclusivity, but the women there are so focused on their sport, on that whole realm, that I find there's very little mother talk. There's some, it is a mainstream podcast, and she has a group on Facebook. So there's mentions here and there, but it's so much focused on sort of the individual woman being the best athlete she can be, that there's not a lot of space for parenthood chatter.
Fabulous.
Brilliant. Fantastic. We will let you get back to bed. Or if you want to get day.
Might be awake for the day.
So the cat would be like, what the heck was going on there? Why are we so up so early?
So cool. When I was getting up, though, I live by a lake, and it's hazy, not cloudy enough to cover the moon, but just hazy. And so it's the full moon setting over the lake through these hazy clouds. And I wouldn't have seen it otherwise. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Brilliant.
Lovely.
Lovely to catch up with you again as well. It really has been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you after quite a long time of not talking to you. Busy with our lives as we are. So thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. And if you want to find out more about our podcast or have a burning topic we've not covered, please reach out to us, as we'd like to be as inclusive and diverse as possible. Now, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn and Mastodon, and we have a channel on YouTube, and of course at www.thefullstoppod.com. And here you can sign up for our listeners list, where you can keep up to date with what's going on in our world. And if you'd like to support our podcast, you can find the link to donate there too. Now, we would love it if you could rate the podcast on the platform you are using, and this will help the algorithm get in front of more of our community. Now, special thanks to Anastasia MacDonald, and as always, it's important for us to let you know you're not alone.